You call that a weapon? Looks more like a farming tool, scoffed Zealer, the Chian weapons expert, his mandibles clicking in amusement as he examined the human's rifle. Primitive. Slow. Does it even shoot? Around him, a chorus of laughter erupted from the gathered alien soldiers. They came from across the galaxy, members of the United Coalition of Species, each representing what they believed to be the pinnacle of military technology. Their armor was sleek, their energy-based weapons a marvel of compact power. And here stood humanity, holding what looked to them like an ancient relic. Private James Callahan held his rifle firmly, ignoring the jeers and insults. He was representing Earth in a joint military exercise, the first of its kind. The coalition had insisted humans join their ranks, even if only as a gesture of inclusion. It hadn't taken long for the mockery to start. Callahan was used to it by now. It wasn't the first time their technology had been dismissed as archaic by the more advanced alien species. What's this thing even made of? Steel, Zealer continued, turning the rifle over in his spindly claws. You realize that kinetic weapons are a thing of the past, right? We've been using energy-based systems for millennia. Callahan just shrugged. You don't have to like it, he said casually, but it gets the job done. The alien soldiers broke into laughter again, a cacophony of hoots, whistles, and clicks that filled the room. Callahan watched them calmly, his expression giving away nothing. He knew this was all a game to them. Humans were the newcomers, still seen as rough around the edges, less evolved, even a little barbaric. Enough! Barked Commander Threx, a towering figure with scales that shimmered under the harsh lighting of the armory. His voice cut through the noise like a blade. The room fell silent. Private Callahan, care to explain your weapons capabilities? I'm genuinely curious. Callahan glanced at his rifle and then at the assembly of aliens. He couldn't help the small smile that crept onto his face. This here is an M4 carbine. Shoots a 5.56 by 45 millimeters NATO round. Lightweight, reliable, can fire in semi-automatic or 3-round burst modes. Effective range about 500 m, give or take. Zealer snorted, his mandibles twitching in amusement. And how does it compare to, say, our plasma rifles? Well, Callahan said, choosing his words carefully, plasma rifles are certainly impressive. They can melt through most standard armors, no doubt. But they've got their weaknesses. Power consumption, recoil dampeners overheating after sustained fire. Zealer waved a claw dismissively. Excuses. Plasma is the future. It's energy made lethal. What's the point of hurling a piece of metal at your target when you could incinerate them with a pulse of light? Callahan locked eyes with Zealer, his voice calm. The point is, it works. Before Zealer could retort, Commander Threx interjected. Let's put this debate to rest, shall we? Field test. Now? He turned, gesturing to a door that led to the firing range. Private Callahan, you have the floor. The aliens followed with an air of amusement, some shaking their heads, others whispering to each other in their native languages. Callahan walked calmly behind them, rifle slung over his shoulder. As they entered the range, he noticed the looks of pity and superiority on their faces. They truly believed they had already won whatever competition this was. The firing range was a massive room filled with various targets, hardened metal plates, energy shields, and holographic simulations of hostile entities. It was designed to withstand the might of the Coalition's most powerful weapons. Plasma burns, ion scorch marks, and deep gouges from particle beams lined the walls, a testament to the destructive power the aliens wielded. All right, human, Zealer sneered, standing off to the side, his multi-lensed eyes glinting with mockery. Show us what that relic can do. Callahan nodded, walking to the center of the range. He flipped off the safety, aimed down the sights, and squeezed the trigger. A sharp crack echoed through the room as the rifle fired. The recoil was a familiar, comforting jolt against his shoulder. The round traveled downrange, striking one of the metal targets dead center. The impact was immediate and unmistakable, a small, neat hole punched through the reinforced metal. The aliens blinked, their various optical appendages widening. Zealer's smug expression faltered. All right, he admitted grudgingly, so it can penetrate metal. Impressive for a projectile. Try the shielded target next, Threx ordered, his tone neutral. He wasn't mocking, nor was he impressed. He simply wanted to see. Callahan adjusted his stance, aiming at one of the shimmering energy shields farther downrange. These shields were a point of pride among the Coalition forces, capable of deflecting plasma bolts and even some forms of explosive munitions. No one expected the human rifle to do much against it. He fired again. Another crack split the air. The round sped toward the shield and passed through it with a faint flicker. A second later, the metal target behind the shield clanged as the bullet struck it, leaving a deep dent. Silence filled the range, thick and heavy. Threx's eyes narrowed, and Zealer took a hesitant step forward, his mandibles twitching in confusion. How? Physical projectiles, Callahan said, lowering his rifle, aren't affected by energy dispersion fields like plasma or particle beams are. Your shields are designed to stop energy. My rifle doesn't use energy. It uses physics. Threx's gaze remained fixed on the target, his expression inscrutable. Zealer, however, sputtered in indignation. But that's just crude force. There's no finesse in that. Callahan shrugged. Maybe not, but it works. And sometimes, that's all you need. Threx nodded slowly, turning to face his soldiers. Interesting. Very interesting. It seems we've been overlooking certain fundamentals. The aliens exchanged uneasy glances. This wasn't how they had expected the demonstration to go. They had come to laugh at the human so-called weapon, to show off their superior technology. Instead, they were learning that simplicity had its own brutal effectiveness. Zealer, still unwilling to admit defeat, crossed his arms defiantly. All right, so it can punch through shields, but can it match the rate of fire of our weapons? Callahan smirked, raising his rifle once more. Want to find out? Threx signaled to the technicians at the side of the range. Prepare the automated targets, he ordered, his voice carrying an edge of anticipation. Maximum speed, randomized patterns. The technicians nodded, tapping at their consoles. A series of targets popped up across the range, each with energy shield overlays programmed to dart in erratic patterns. It was a standard exercise for Coalition soldiers, designed to test their reaction time and accuracy with high-speed plasma weapons. Zealer crossed his arms, his mandibles clicking as he glanced at Callahan. Your primitive rifle won't keep up. Plasma fire can track and neutralize these targets in seconds. Callahan gave him a nod, acknowledging the challenge. Let's see what happens. He checked his rifle, adjusting the sights with practiced ease. His posture remained relaxed, his breathing steady. It wasn't bravado, it was experience. On my mark, Threx commanded. 3, 2, 1, go! The range came to life in a blur of movement and flashing shields. Targets zipped side to side, changed elevation, and occasionally disappeared behind temporary barriers. Zealer watched, expecting the human to struggle. After all, this drill required pinpoint accuracy, rapid adjustments, and constant tracking, something plasma rifles excelled at due to their instantaneous energy discharge. But then, Callahan began firing. The rifle barked with each shot, a rapid series of cracks that echoed through the range. The sound was almost rhythmic, mechanical as he squeezed the trigger in quick succession. His eyes tracked the targets methodically, his movements smooth and calculated. Every time a target paused or changed direction, he fired, and every time he fired, a shield flickered out of existence, followed by a metallic clang as the bullet hit its mark. The alien soldiers stared, their disbelief growing with each impact. They watched as, one by one, the targets fell, each cleanly struck. Callahan didn't waste time on fancy maneuvers. He kept his stance grounded, his attention focused. The rifle continued its rhythmic song, a relentless pulse of sound that filled the room. Impossible, Zealer blurted, his mandibles flaring wide. How can you keep up with their speed? Practice, Callahan replied without looking back, his tone as calm as if he were discussing the weather. We train with moving targets all the time. You don't need a fancy system for that. You just need good reflexes and aim. Zealer bristled, but his argument died on his lips. The results spoke for themselves. Callahan had managed to hit nearly every target, even those that the coalition considered the most difficult to track. A final shot rang out, and the last target crumpled, its shield flickering as it fell to the ground. The room was silent save for the faint hum of the automated range powering down. Threx stepped forward, his expression a mixture of curiosity and something else. Respect, perhaps. Your weapon performs admirably in combat conditions, he admitted, though the words seemed to taste bitter. But rate of fire isn't everything. Your rifle lacks the destructive power of our plasma systems. A single plasma bolt can vaporize entire sections of a target. Callahan glanced at the commander, then at the smoking targets scattered across the range. True, he acknowledged, plasma is powerful, but it has its limitations. High energy consumption, need for cooling, and if you miss, you're wasting precious power. Threx continued, a glint in his eye. Then perhaps you'd be willing to test that power difference. Face a target your weapon can't simply pierce with brute force, something larger. The atmosphere shifted. Callahan understood what Threx was implying. This wasn't about proving a point anymore. It was a challenge, a test of whether humanity's weapons could match the Coalition's destructive might. Callahan nodded. All right, what do you have in mind? The commander gestured to the technicians again. Prepare the armored target. At his command, a section of the floor opened, and a massive block of reinforced metal rose into view. It was covered in an array of defensive coatings, designed to withstand even the Coalition's heaviest artillery. The alien soldiers exchanged knowing glances. This was the Coalition's ultimate test for weaponry, a dense, multi-layered construct engineered to shrug off plasma fire, ion cannons, and even high-yield explosives. The rifle in Callahan's hands seemed pitiful by comparison. Let's see how your physics stacks up against this, Zealer sneered, confident that this demonstration would finally end the human charade. Callahan approached the firing line, assessing the target. His fingers moved to his vest, where he pulled out a small cylindrical object, an attachment he screwed onto the muzzle of his rifle, locking it in place. Zealer tilted his head, confused. What's that? Some kind of muzzle brake? Suppressor? Suppressor, Callahan replied simply. And this, he added, producing a specialized magazine filled with sleek pointed rounds, is armor-piercing ammo designed for targets like this? Zealer blinked, his mandibles twitching uncertainly. Armor-piercing? Your puny bullets won't. You don't need to understand it. Callahan interrupted, his voice cold and sharp. Just watch. He inserted the magazine, chambered around, and aimed downrange. His body stilled. The world around him seemed to narrow, and he focused solely on the target. The room felt tense, every alien soldier leaning in, eyes glued to the scene. Callahan squeezed the trigger. The rifle roared, a deeper, more aggressive bark than before. The bullet flew straight, striking the armored block. For a second, it seemed like nothing had happened. No flash, no explosion. Then a faint, almost inaudible crack spread across the target surface. Zealer opened his mandibles to scoff, but the sound died as he noticed something. The crack widened, and a chunk of the outer layer fell away, revealing a gash in the metal. Gasps and clicks of disbelief echoed through the room. Small caliber, Callahan said, breaking the stunned silence, but with enough velocity and the right design, it can punch through nearly anything. That's what kinetic weapons can do. Threx stepped closer, examining the impact site, his eyes narrowing in concentration. You engineered a projectile to bypass traditional defenses, he muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. Focused impact, no energy dispersion. It's not about sheer power, Callahan explained, ejecting the spent magazine. It's about precision adaptability. Sometimes the simplest solution can overcome the most complex defenses. Zealer's eyes darted between the human and the damaged target, his confidence cracking like the armor itself. You planned this? Callahan met his gaze unflinchingly. We didn't plan to impress. We planned to survive. The room stood in stunned silence, the echoes of the last shot still lingering. Callahan remained at the firing line, his expression neutral. The aliens were no longer mocking or scoffing. They were staring, processing what they had just witnessed. The hulking armored target, once considered impenetrable, now sported a gash that spoke volumes about the power of a seemingly primitive weapon. Commander Threx, always the observer, finally straightened up. His eyes remained fixed on the target as he approached it, his scaled fingers running across the damaged surface, tracing the path where the projectile had breached the metal. He turned slowly to face Callahan, his voice measured. Impressive. Your weapon isn't just simple. It's calculated. Zealer, still grappling with what had unfolded, shook his head in disbelief. But how? With all our technological advances, how does such a basic weapon achieve this? His tone carried a mix of confusion and an unwilling respect. Callahan took a step forward, feeling the weight of their scrutiny. Your technology is incredible, no doubt. Plasma rifles, ion cannons, energy shields, they're marvels of engineering. But sometimes, all that complexity overlooks basic principles. He gestured to his rifle. Kinetic weapons use raw force. No energy signature, no overheating, just physics at its finest. We adapted to harsh conditions on our home world by learning how to make simple tools do the most damage. Zealer scoffed, though there was a noticeable uncertainty in his posture now. You're saying we've been over-engineering our weapons? Not exactly, Callahan replied. You've been optimizing for your circumstances. Plasma weapons make sense when you have access to advanced energy resources and need to deal with similarly advanced defenses. But humans grew up on a world that threw everything at us: storms, predators, other humans. We learned to make our weapons effective with whatever materials we had at hand. Threx nodded slowly, his expression contemplative. It's not about which is superior, he said thoughtfully. It's about using what you have to its fullest potential. Your weapon, despite its simplicity, is lethal because it's grounded in fundamental truths of the physical universe. He paused, looking around the room at his soldiers. And that's something we've forgotten in our pursuit of technological perfection. Zealer shifted, his eyes flicking between Threx and Callahan. The pride in his species' technological achievements wavered with the reality of what he had just seen. You're saying that there's still value in brute force? Not brute force, Callahan corrected. Precision, simplicity, adaptability. Your technology is amazing, but it's specialized. Our weapons aren't flashy, but they adapt to almost any situation. Sometimes, the old ways are the best because they're flexible, easy to maintain, and can catch the enemy off guard. He slung the rifle over his shoulder, his stance relaxed yet firm. You mocked our primitive arms because they didn't fit your idea of modern warfare. But they've kept us alive through wars, disasters, and the harshest environments. Threx raised a hand, signaling for silence as the other soldiers murmured among themselves. You've given us much to consider, Private Callahan, he said, his voice carrying the weight of command. Perhaps it's time we stop underestimating what we don't understand. He glanced at Zealer, who nodded hesitantly. The insectoid alien seemed to be struggling with the admission, but there was a glimmer of grudging respect in his eyes. Agreed, Zealer finally muttered. We've been too focused on refining our own methods, neglecting other forms of combat. Your demonstration has expanded our perspective. He turned to Threx, adding with a hint of bitterness, we must explore a wider array of weaponry in our training programs. Threx nodded, his gaze returning to Callahan. Humanity has proven to be more than we expected. Private, your primitive arms may seem simple, but they possess a versatility that we've overlooked in battle. Versatility often means survival. He took a step closer, offering a hand to Callahan. You've given us a lesson in humility today, and for that, I thank you. Callahan shook Threx's hand firmly, feeling a rush of pride, not for himself, but for what his species had achieved. We're just here to do our part, Commander. We've got a lot to learn from you, too. Threx turned to address the room, his voice booming. Let this be a lesson to us all. We are not as invincible as we believe. Our technology, while powerful, is not the only path to victory. Sometimes the answer lies in the tried and true methods that have stood the test of time. His eyes swept over his soldiers. Dismissed, the alien troops began to disperse, many of them glancing back at Callahan with newfound respect. Zeeler lingered, looking at the rifle one last time before giving Callahan a nod. Perhaps we underestimated you humans. There's more to your species than we thought. Callahan smirked, slinging his rifle back over his shoulder. That's the thing about us. We're full of surprises. As he left the range, Callahan felt a sense of quiet satisfaction. The Coalition had learned a valuable lesson. Not just about human weaponry, but about the essence of conflict itself. It wasn't always about who had the flashiest technology or the most complex systems. Sometimes it was about understanding the basics, adapting to the situation, and using every tool to its maximum potential. Humanity's primitive arms had sent a message that resonated through the hulls of the alien ranks. There was strength in simplicity. He walked out of the armory, hearing the whispers of alien soldiers still discussing the demonstration. Today, they had witnessed a truth that they had long forgotten, and while the Coalition's weapons would continue to evolve, they would now carry a reminder that some of the most effective tools were the ones that had existed for centuries. As the door closed behind him, Callahan allowed himself a small, knowing smile. It wasn't just the rifle that had made a point. It was humanity itself. Primitive, maybe. Effective, absolutely.